Hello, sports fans, and welcome back to another brand new episode of Ball Games and Beyond. I am your host, Evan Groat. Ball Games and Beyond is brought to you by Sportsnaut.com, and you can follow me on X at egroat5. Now, there's multiple ways for you to either view or listen to the show. First of all, you can find the video format of the show on our YouTube page. Search Sportsnaut. Click the notifications bell so you always get the brand new episodes of Ball Games and Beyond. And if you are just into audio, don't have the time to sit down and watch the full video, maybe you want to listen to the show on your commute to work in the morning, go ahead and follow the show and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. You can find us on all of the major podcasting platforms by searching Ball Games and Beyond. So there's no excuses for you guys not to be tuning into the show each and every week. Now, there's a lot going on again, as always, a lot going on this week in the world of sports. We have the Kentucky Derby, the Run for the Roses. The 150th Kentucky Derby takes place this week on Saturday. We have a brand new interview up on the website, sportsnaut.com. So if you're into the horse racing, check out that interview that's available for you. Of course, the NBA playoffs well underway. We have a couple of teams who have now advanced into the second round of the playoffs. We also have an interview for you, again, on sportsnaut.com, where we kind of discuss the headlines going on right now with the NBA. So check out both of those interviews. But what I want to focus on for the show this week is the NFL draft. I know we're a couple days beyond last weekend's draft, but you've had a chance now to digest and look at all the different draft grades and kind of see how your team did in the draft. I'm sure you put a grade on your team. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. It was a record-setting NFL draft here, and I have some numbers for you that I want to share with you if you are not yet aware. There was a record 23 offensive players that were drafted in round one, and the first 14 picks of the draft were all offensive players. That is the longest streak at any point in the draft on one side of the ball since the common draft era, which is in 1967. So that's quite a long time here. Some more records that were at least tied in this year's draft. And it was an offensive dominated draft. 6 quarterbacks went in round one. That ties the record from 1983. You had 7 wide receivers who were drafted, and that ties a round one record that goes back to 2004. And then you had 8 offensive linemen, which again tied a record from the 2008 draft. So if your team was in need of an offensive player, this was the draft to get it done. The surprise from round one, it shocked the world, was the Atlanta Falcons selecting Michael Penix, number 8. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that was a reach by any means. He was going to go probably top 12 to 15 based on a lot of the reports that we were hearing now that the draft is over. But the team that selected him, that was definitely a surprise considering the Falcons just went out and signed Kirk Cousins just a few weeks ago in free agency to a 4-year, $180 million contract with $100 million guaranteed. Many of us thought that the Falcons were all in on winning right now, building around Kirk Cousins. When you think about the division they play in, the NFC South, that was a division that you bring Kirk Cousins into your team and you have a very, very good chance to make the playoffs and possibly make a bit of a run. They kind of surprise people and go ahead and draft a player that will help them in the future and not now. So a bit of a head scratcher. I actually had an opportunity to talk with and interview D. Orlando Ledbetter last week following the selection, and he explained some of the rationale behind the selection because he spoke with the general manager and the coach of the team. And again, that pick was all about building for the future. So go ahead and check that interview out. It's up now at sportsnaut.com and on the YouTube channel as well if you want to learn a little bit more about the selection. But we're going to also talk to our guest this week. In just a moment, I'm going to bring in our guest, Eric Edholm. He is from NFL.com, and he covers the NFL draft as well as he does power rankings for NFL.com. So we're going to talk to him. We're going to get some of his thoughts on this record-setting draft. all the offensive players that we saw go off the board. We're going to talk specifically about some of the quarterbacks and where he thinks who landed in the best spot, who has the opportunity to have the most success early on in their career. So you don't want to miss that conversation coming up next after we return from this quick break. All of that coming up next on Ball Games and Beyond. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to Ball Games and Beyond. And now it is time to welcome in our guest this week. And joining us from NFL.com is Eric Edholm. And Eric covers the NFL draft for NFL.com. And there's a lot that I want to discuss with you, Eric. But before we do that, thank you for giving us a few minutes and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, let's get it started with the big surprise from last week's draft. Now, of course, we're a few days out, and we've had a chance to now digest some of the picks. But the one that I keep hearing people talk about was the surprise pick by the Atlanta Falcons, going with Michael Penix, number 8, just a few weeks after signing Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million deal. It's come under some criticism from some people out there. I actually had the opportunity to speak with one of the Falcons beat reporters, and he kind of explained the logic behind the pick after he spoke with the general manager and the head coach of the team. But I'm curious to get some of your thoughts on that selection by the Falcons to go with Michael Penix, number 8 overall.
Yeah, I think to dispel, one possible rumor, I mean, he was going to go high no matter what. If he hadn't gone to the Falcons, there might have been a trade, in the next 1 to 3 picks, or there might have just been a Penix selection. There were other teams trying to get up. So I didn't have a problem with, where he went in the draft, the range of picks. But, like everybody's pointing out, this Cousins-Penix dynamic is going to be fascinating. I thought Bill Belichick on Pat McAfee's show brought up a really good point, which is, hey, it's never bad to have 2 good quarterbacks. And I think there's something to that. If you're going to invest all that money in Penix, you better well have a darn reliable backup, because if he goes down, the season's over, right? So unless you feel really good about your number 2. So that's one possible logic. I do have a hard time believing that, especially after everything they did this offseason, which included Cousins, was geared towards winning now. They felt like they had a playoff roster a year ago, or a roster that could have won the NFC South. I guess that's how you have to say it. But, his quarterbacking was the one spot they didn't get right. They upgraded there. They added Darnell Mooney at a big price tag. They made other additions as well. So everything up until that point was straight ahead, towards this season. A little bit surprising that at number 8 they're going to do this. Look, I get the Green Bay example as how it can be pulled off. No arguments there. However, Jordan Love was the 26th pick in the draft or whatever he was. He was also several years younger. I mean, Michael Penix this month of May turns 24 years old. So, if you're believing Cousins can play 3 of the 4 years of that contract, we're not seeing him until he's 27. So that's where you sort of dig back a little bit and say, it's hard to justify that over every defensive player in the draft. One had not been taken yet. They have, I don't know, it feels like they could compete in that division, but I didn't love their entire draft haul to begin with. But as much as I like Penix, it's also a little bit curious right now.
Yeah, I mean, I could see both sides of the argument, and you mentioned the 2 main points is that, yes, we have seen teams have success. You mentioned the Packers drafting Jordan Love to, take the place of Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers was the guy put in place to take over for Brett Favre, and it worked out for them very well. So it's hard to argue with what the Falcons did, but you mentioned the other aspect of this, which is the age of Michael Penix, and that is something you have to consider here. If Kirk Cousins should play out the length of the contract, again, 28, 29 years old before Michael Penix takes the field. So again, I do see both sides of the argument. I want to talk about some of the other quarterbacks that were selected in round 1. It was a draft that was dominated by offensive players, but early in the draft, especially round 1, it was dominated by the quarterbacks. Which of the 6 quarterbacks do you feel landed in the best position to have success right away?
Yeah, I think you look at two of the choices. One would be Caleb Williams at one. Look what Chicago's done, not just this offseason, but last year to upgrade the offense. And we saw strides last year. Fields gets hurt in the middle of the year, but DJ Moore had a great season with both quarterbacks in there. They've built this offensive line to a point where they didn't feel the need to take one at 9. They're now adding Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. That's a great spot. Cole Kmet's a really underrated tight end. I think he's coming into his own. DeAndre Swift. They've added quite a bit. So I think that's got to be, at worst, the second best. And the first might be Minnesota. You think about what they've put together, and it's been pretty impressive too. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is the best skill guy that any rookie quarterback will play with this year. Jordan Addison won't be too far down the list. So starting right there, even with TJ Hawkinson coming off an injury, and their offensive line's in great shape. And Kevin O'Connell's one of the best, I think, quarterback nurturers. I mean, he got some good play, at least in one game spurts last year out of, a cast of characters that nobody could have predicted would be starting games for the Vikings. So, we've seen his evidence of him being an elite play caller, and I think you give him J.J. McCarthy, and like at Michigan, the environment was very good around him, and maybe that's all you need. Everyone's worried about the individual quarterback talent. What does an above-average talent with elite intangibles do with a group like that? That's my question. I think he'll do really well for himself. It may not be the gaudiest stats, but the wins are what Vikings fans care about, and I think the organization does too. So I think those are the two best spots right now for a rookie to thrive. It wouldn't shock me if Jaden Daniels had a big rookie year, but I don't know that he's working with a complete cast there in Washington. Drake May, same thing. I think he's going to have to bide his time a little bit, and the Patriots want to be careful with him. So Bo Nix, obviously there could be some interesting skill talent there, and Sean Payton, obviously in good hands with him, but he can be tough as a quarterback, mentor. I mean, he was tough on Russell Wilson, a veteran with a lot of skins on the wall last year. Does Bo Nix have the thick skin to hold up to that? And that's a big question, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the other quarterbacks. You mentioned a lot of the quarterbacks actually, but which one? We know you feel McCarthy and Caleb Williams have the best opportunity to kind of have success early on. But do you feel like there's a different quarterback maybe that is a better fit with maybe the offensive coordinator that he's working with? I mean, you mentioned Bo Nix and Sean Payton. Do you like a specific fit?
Yeah, I like that fit actually. I mean, I think Nix is his best skills. He's very accurate, close to the line of scrimmage. Obviously, we think of especially later career Drew Brees. Now Brees was also a master of protections and understood coverages and had every trick in the book to pull those short throws off. Nix isn't there yet, right? But his skill set overlaps a lot of what Brees did in New Orleans. Now, it's going to be a little bit of a different animal, and we don't know Cortland Sutton's status right now. He's been kind of hanging in the balance, but, is their offensive line complete right now? Do they feel good about their pecking order at receiver after trading Jerry Jeudy and possibly moving on from Sutton? Again, I don't know what they're going to do, but, there's still some questions there. So I like the fit in terms of skill set and play caller. Sean's screen game is terrific. He loves those quick hitters, those timing and rhythm plays. And so, and they'll have some gadget stuff worked in there. And they have 3 running backs now who, feasibly could share the load. That's often what he did in New Orleans. He had 3 guys who could do various things. So I think you'll see shades of that, and he can groom them from the start. But again, Nix has got to be able to hold up to the scrutiny. I mean, he went through the ringer at Auburn. He was in the spotlight at Oregon, maybe not as big a spotlight as other places, but was certainly, put himself there with 2 great seasons.
We always hear about comps, and I'm not sure how you feel about like comping a rookie coming into the league with maybe a past NFL player. And I want to stay with the conversation about Bo Nix. And you mentioned Drew Brees. Do you think that's a good comp for Bo Nix? Would be Drew Brees? Style-wise, yes. I mean, I think there's some overlap there. Now,
when Drew first got into the league, he had this kind of elongated delivery, and he had to really tighten it up, especially when you're doing those shorter timing throws and things like that. And but he had the right mindset. He was, the Joe Tiller offense. He came into the league with the same kind of attack mentality, but do it with 1,000 paper cuts. And I think that's, at least, that's the style of play that Bo Nix became good at when he was in structure at Oregon. You saw a guy who minimized mistakes, didn't put the ball often in harm's way. When things broke down a little bit, that's when, could he pull out a great play out of his tail? Yes, he could. But he also was more prone to mistakes and game-changing turnovers at those moments. That was really when you could pressure him, when you could kind of rattle him, get him off his spots, change that timing. And, Drew was the same way too. He started taking more sacks later in his career. So, yeah, I mean, again, I definitely don't think I'm saying Bo Nix will be a future Hall of Famer, right, but there's a lot to like about him, and there's also some limitations to what you could love about him. But I'm sure that's how I felt about Breeze when he first came into the league, and you have the ability to prove people wrong, and maybe that's it.
Absolutely. And he'll certainly be working with a guy that's had a pretty good track record with quarterbacks with Sean Payton. We can't really truly evaluate a draft class or an individual player until at least 3 or 4 years, I would say, to be fair. But when you look at the current group of quarterbacks coming into the league and focusing more so on the ones that went in round one, how good do you think this quarterback class could be when, we're looking back here 10 to 12 years later?
Yeah, and I think we'll need that long, right? We just got done talking about Penix, and he'll have to wait. So, by 3-4 years, maybe he's only got 1 year of starting at that point. We may not be able to even write the story on him. Drake May could have. I mean, it's funny. You could do it one of two ways. You could be the guy who struggles his first couple years, and then all of a sudden the light comes on, and I think that could be him, right? You'll see the ability, you believe it's there, you just haven't seen it come together. And then all of a sudden, everything starts clicking. That's the kind of career I can foresee for Drake May. Jaden Daniels, I think, will come in and be kind of NFL ready in some respects. The big question is, how does he hold up over the course of 17 games and or longer with a body that's only recently added a little bit more bulk and kind of body armor, if you will. He's going to take hits. They didn't draft a pure tackle in this class. That was a big need position. We heard about them liking one or two guys, maybe willing to trade up into round one to get one of them. It didn't materialize. It's going to be a little bit, they let go of Morgan Moses and, one of the, I guess, more reliable guys they've had on the outside. And so, it's about finding the right group up front, and that should happen over time. I trust Scott Peters, but I think Daniels can do well immediately, but I also give it, he could get hurt week one or whatever. So Caleb, I think, will face some scrutiny early because they just all rookie quarterbacks in that type of situation do. And I live here in Chicago, and I can know fans are scooping up his jerseys like crazy. There were a lot of pro Fields people here, and they felt like that was their guy, and it wasn't quite right, but they were willing to kind of work with him on it, and it just never happened. And they're desperate to wrap their arms around some quarterback savior, and none of them have been quite right. Even Caleb's personality has been off-putting to some people for various reasons, and so there'll be pressure on him, and you've got a coach in probably a win or he might be looking over his shoulder kind of mode. And yes, he got him out of a hole last year, but I don't think they can afford to get in too big a hole this year. So there's just a lot of trapdoors and situations like that. Obviously, it's with Nix. He might be your surprise performer. The last guy drafted. Again, not a terrible situation, but not a great one. And if he's just smart, efficient, matriculate the ball down the field with a lot of short throws and accurate throws, maybe he's one of your early surprises who ends up being a pleasant pick where he went. So considering how it unfolded, it'll be fascinating. This is the first time we've been this deeply invested in the quarterback position in the draft. 5 and 15 a couple years ago, Trevor Lawrence, Trey Lance, all that. that felt like, wow, this is a big watershed moment, and we've blown past that. Now, next year, who knows? But, it's so fascinating when you look at it from that 30,000-foot view and think about how much of a priority quarterback has become in the draft, even more so than it was pretty high a generation ago.
Yeah, 100% quarterback-driven league. We are joined by Eric Edholm this week on Ball Games and Beyond, NFL.com. He writes about the draft, and he does the power rankings on NFL.com as well. We're going to ask him about that in just a second as well. One of the other positions that really dominated the early parts of the draft, round one, was the wide receiver. Now, which one of the top wide receivers in round one do you think will find some success, very early on? Which player?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine those top three guys not doing something early on. I mean, Marvin Harrison figures to be the number one in Arizona, or the 1B at worst, I think. I mean, look, Rondale Moore's gone, Hollywood Brown's gone. They have open jobs, right? Michael Wilson was impressive in spurts, but I mean, he should be the guy there. Malik Neighbors should be in the same situation in New York, and you saw Wan'Dale Robinson break out, and they have some other veterans they've had kind of stick around for a while. But, with Darren Waller's status in doubt, I think they're going to play a lot of, three wide and get him the ball and have him be the feature guy like Odell his rookie year, where, could he have that kind of year? Absolutely. No question about it. Maybe he's more statistically impressive than Harrison, but Harrison scores more touchdowns or something like that. And Rome Odunze, he's in really a beautiful no-pressure spot. Of course, he could have the least of the three, just given the fact that there is more, and Keenan Allen ahead of him, and Kmet essentially too. So, if he has a 35-catch, 480-yard, 4-touchdown season, I'm not going to be disappointed, but you'll understand why, given the constraints. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's like another guy that I think is in such a good spot.
What about
Brian Thomas in Jacksonville?
What about
is he going to vault to that elite level right away? We'll see. In the long run, I think he's got tremendous upside. I really like Brian Thomas. He was my number 12 overall player. There was a little bit of an injury question with him, but he's the one I think that, and even accounting for somebody like Ladd McConkey, who could be a 80 catch, 800-yard guy year one. It wouldn't shock me if he's very busy as an underneath guy. And, you'll see some Cooper Kupp comparisons, even though he's a different player. But that kind of a receiver, that wouldn't stun me at all.
What about Keon Coleman to
another
the Bills?
Good one.
I'm out here in Western New York, and a lot of people I'm around are Bills fans, and they've gotten a lot of criticism for trading with the Chiefs and moving out of round one when they so badly needed a wide receiver. How did you think they did, walking away with just Keon Coleman?
Yeah, I would love to hear, it's not like a criticism. I would just love to hear what they thought of Brian Thomas, because he had fallen enough to where I knew the Bills didn't have a full deck of picks, right? I mean, they had to be very selective if they were going to move up, and they couldn't go very far. It had to be for the right player. So I suspect Thomas they weren't necessarily enamored with, to the point where they felt that move needed to be made. Comes to their pick, they slide back twice, right? So, obviously the worthy pick, again, they obviously had some kind of second or third round value on him, to where they just didn't feel like it was a big deal letting the Chiefs have, and they may be proven right. We've seen other guys in that late first round, early second round range where you think, oh boy, he's going to a contender. This is a great spot, and it never works out. There's a high bust rate at receiver, but he's got world-beating speed, so we'll see if he can avoid the drops and things like that, which have plagued Kansas City and have plagued him at times. He could be special. So with Coleman, I think people got so hung up on that combine 40 time, 4.61, which isn't even a bad time necessarily when you're as big as he is, that I felt like it overshadowed what he did athletically. The rest of the combine, very good, especially considering his size. And also over the course of two different schools, Michigan State and Florida State, a really talented receiver, somebody with outstanding play strength and body control. hands, can adjust the balls outside of his frame, catches the ball in stride. And again, probably not going to be a massive yards after the catch guy, but somebody who I think could end up being very reliable. By the end of his career, Stephon Diggs wasn't a big yards after the catch guy. He could make a guy miss, of course, but like, if you think about it, he was more about getting open, making that tough play. And I think if you think about it in those terms, and also Stephon Diggs was a 4 or 5 guy, let's not get too hung up on the speed factor. Even so, I'd love to know, who their deep threat is. Do they feel like that player's on the roster? Obviously you can't have everything, and it's going to be a reimagined passing game, but there's a guy I want throwing it. It's Josh Allen. So I think it'll work out one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now it seems like they got a bunch of slot receivers on their roster, but I'm sure they'll figure that out.
Yeah.
We'll get you out of here on this one. You've been very generous with your time, and we appreciate that. I mentioned your power rankings. I was reading through your most recent post-draft power rankings. Could you give us just one team that you think really improved themselves or, through the draft, and then maybe one team that you think missed an opportunity to move up in your power rankings?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's I don't want to pick on the Falcons. I feel like it's overkill at this point, but people have been so kind of focused on the Penix aspect of it. I mean, again, if they had a great draft outside of that, I would have gotten on board. I would have said, look, let's give these guys an opportunity. Last year they had no quarterbacks. Now they have 2 and you're mad? That's the kind of attitude I would have taken. But Ruko Ororo, I never felt like was a top 40 talent. I saw a good player, but not a great one, and maybe one who develops into something a little more. But again, I felt like kind of a lower ceiling than some people were saying. So Braylon Trice was kind of my early season college football favorite. He's a blast to watch, but from a scouting perspective, there's some worries. He's a little bit undersized, tried to bulk up for the combine, didn't work. I look at that, and Brandon Dorlus was a pretty good pick. I think they got him in round 4 pretty early. I like that pick. I thought that was probably one of their best ones. The kid they took out of Georgia late, Zion Logue, I think is actually a really intriguing project, but that's a dart throw. JD Bertrand and a few other guys. I just didn't love the whole class. And then on top of that, this, it could work out, but clearly there's a lot riding on the deft handling of that situation. Let's go to the only team above them in the alphabet, the Arizona Cardinals. I like the direction of this franchise. I really do. I mean, Harrison kind of speaks for itself. I'm sure they had offers. They decided, we like this guy. I mean, the thing that meshes so well is that Marvin Harrison Jr. brings credibility the day he walks into an NFL training or facility, rather. And then when people see him work, like I've had people at Ohio State say to me, like, I don't know if you understand, like this guy is a tone setter, doesn't say a word, works his tail off. And so I think those are the kind of players that they're trying to find as many of them as possible out there. And they were a competitive team. They won 2 games in December on the road last year, and Pittsburgh, Philly. I mean, they were improved by the end of the year, and they were in almost every game. And now they're adding Harrison, Darius Robinson, Max Melton, one of my favorite corners, Trey Benson. I really like that pick. I think he's going to complement James Conner really well, who's still going strong. Tip Ryman, the really athletic tight end out of Illinois, he's a fun pick, and DDT out of Texas Tech, the safety, is another one that I liked. And Christian Jones, boy, I didn't love him as a player, but I thought, there aren't enough tackles in this class. It's really heavy at the top. It drops off. Like, he'll be a 4th round pick, and he ended up in the 6th. So just sort of felt like every pick they made, Xavier Thomas, a few more, really understood the logic behind it and or thought they got a good talent or value or some combination of that. So I didn't get out of the A's, but that's the best I can do.
No problem. We appreciate the time, Eric Edholm. Go out there and follow him on X. That's at Eric_Edholm, and you can read up on his power rankings on NFL.com. Thanks again for the time, Eric. We appreciate you, and keep up all your great work.
All right, buddy. Talk to you soon, man. Thank you.